Hey, James, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hello. Yeah. Nice to talk to you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I really wanted to have you. My audience knows that I'm in the middle of a book launch and I knew how busy you were. And I was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to make this happen now. Congratulations on your book being such a success.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a really crazy year. And, it's my first one, so I'm still kind of learning as I go throughout the process, but it's been really, really great to see such positive reception. And I think ultimately the real test of any book is like, is it working in the real world? Are people, actually implementing it and using it? And so seeing people do that has probably been the most gratifying part of the whole process for me, is just like knowing that it actually is making a difference. So thank you.
Yeah, it really is making a difference. And it is such a huge feat to have the success that it's had. It's just phenomenal. I want to get into the book in a moment, but before we do that, I want to know what even led you in your own life to want to look at habits and human potential and ask these questions, like, how can we live better? Like, what was your journey that even evoked that for you?
Yeah. So I sort of have like two entry points to the topic. So the first one, I mean, if you never think about habits, if you don't read Atomic Habits, you never question them or write them down or anything, you're still going to build them all the time. And that's the reality of being human, is that we're building habits always. And so, like everybody else, I was picking them up as I was growing up and and going along. And one of the major areas where I learned a lot of habits early on was through sports. And so I played a variety of sports growing up, played baseball all the way through college. And I tell the story in the introduction of the book, but I suffered this very serious injury my sophomore year of high school, where I was hit in the face with a baseball bat.
Oh,
And the
God.
process of recovering from that, took I couldn't drive a car for 8 or 9 months. I had double vision. My first physical therapy session, I was practicing basic motor patterns, like walking in a straight line. So it was a very long, arduous process to get
Oh
back,
my
probably
God.
depending on how you want to measure it, somewhere between 2 and 5 years before I was back, playing at a high level.
Oh my God.
And so I had to build a lot of small habits during that time. And so that was kind of the first area that I learned the concepts. Now, at that time, I didn't have any language for it. Like if you were to come up to me, I wouldn't have said, "Oh, I'm just trying to get 1% better today." Like I was just doing what I was needed to do in the gym or classroom or wherever. And then it was only a few years later that I had this second entry point into the topic, where I went to graduate school, I got done, and I launched my own business. And for the first 2 years, I kind of just flopped around and like tried ideas and didn't really make a lot of progress. And so I started studying and reading about consumer psychology to figure out, like, okay, why do people sign up to an email list or buy a product, or like, what actually gets people to move? And that started to lead me toward behavioral psychology, habit formation, and some of these other topics that are related to consumer psychology. And once I started to realize and learn a little bit about those ideas, I connected the dots back to my previous experience as an athlete. It was like, oh, that was what I was doing, in the gym or on the field, or this is a concept I could use to build my writing habit or to improve my nutrition habits or whatever. So I sort of had the practice first and then the theory later. And now I kind of think that's a decent way to describe what I do, which is I try to be a bridge between scientific research and academic studies and like kind of scientifically grounded ideas about how a habit works and how it forms, and practical experience in daily life and work. And that's really what I'm most interested in, is how do we take the ideas about how a habit works, the science of how it works, and apply it to daily life.
So
So I kind of like
good.
that in between.
So it's so good. And I love that you come at this from both being a human being and just like your personal physical well-being, and then also like in a business sense, like what's working, what's not working. So before you wrote the book, before you started to have all the answers in your own life, what were some of the habits that you started applying that started to make a difference?
Yeah. So after the injury, that was kind of the first period in my life when, first I went to physical therapy. And then after that, I started training consistently in the gym, at first once or twice a week, then maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of a few years. So that habit made a big difference. My body started to change, started to get stronger and make progress on the sports field. And then, this is true, I think, for many students at this age. It's not necessarily unique to me, but it is true that it was part of my path, which is, as I was when I was in high school, I would just build this little habit where I would write down everything on my to-do list for the next day, the night before. And that was a small habit, but actually I should probably do that more now than I do. So it's still very useful. And then when I got to college, I just had to start building habits around preparing for class and, spending an hour each day prepping or something like that. And so those study habits were, again, something I think a lot of students do, but also part of my journey along the way. And then probably the third one, and the one that was like most of it, like an outlier, especially on a college campus, is that I had this little rule where I would always go to bed by midnight. Like if I had to choose, do I study for another hour, or do I stay up and hang out or whatever, or do I go to bed at midnight? I always went to bed then. And so that sleep habit, I think, counted for a lot and kind of kept me helped me perform at a high level, both athletically and academically.
So
So
cool.
those were some of the ones that I was building before I knew about habits and how they worked and kind of, had a language to describe them.
Awesome. So before we even dive into the book, which we will, of course, obviously, because this is a show that's geared toward people who are looking to specifically form new habits and work to be able to grow a business that really feels connected and purposeful and meaningful. When you were looking into those kinds of ideas around what connects, what are the things that sell versus the things that don't, what are the things that people are attracted to, what can you tell us that we could start to maybe apply to our business, to the way that we're approaching our business?
So this is actually a topic that I reference in passing in Atomic Habits. It's not what the book is about, but it does tie in a little bit. But the core idea is that we can debate exactly how we want to frame these desires, but I'll kind of go in multiple levels. So you could imagine that at a very high level, every human has two broad desires. The first desire is to defend themselves from threats, to stay safe. And the second desire is to discover or explore the environment. And basically every reward that you have in life, whether it is learning what a pancake tastes like for the first time, or discovering something new and interesting to read, or meeting a new person that maybe you'll end up dating or marrying, even like learning what is over the next side of the ridge when you're on a hike, every reward in life comes from the willingness to explore the unknown. Because at first, when we come into the world, we don't know anything. And so the willingness to explore the unknown is the source of all rewards, but it is also the source of uncertainty and fear, and sometimes negative outcomes and consequences. And so we're continually faced with this balance between choosing, do I defend myself by staying within this circle that I know, right? Like, let me stay in this room, I know exactly what's in here, or let me stay in my house or in my neighborhood rather than exploring the world at large or traveling. Or do I choose to face the unknown and try to find a new reward that I haven't already found? And pretty much all of the actions that we take can be lumped into those two buckets. Like even if you go to a networking event or a conference or something, and you only have one friend who's there and everybody else is new to you, you kind of like, start to gravitate toward your friend and like, hey, maybe we'll hang out at cocktail hour. And like, I talk to you because I know you, but I'm not really branching out into all the other unknowns.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So you can start to see that type of behavior all over the place. Now, so the interesting question for anybody running a business is, all right now my product or my service is unknown to anybody who I'm trying to market to. And so you have to ask yourself, what gets people to step into the unknown? And there are a certain level of desires. So now the first level is like desire to defend or the desire to discover. Yeah. Then within desire to discover, we've got like a subset of things. And it's like, well, people want to discover things from a very basic level. We need energy to survive. Any organism that does not have energy cannot continue living. And the more that we can get energy in a time efficient manner, the more effective we are, and we have like time and energy to use on other things that we want to do. So two broad buckets there. One is helping people get energy, and the other is helping people save time. And if you look at those two things, a lot of products do one of those two. Like obviously you have all kinds of health and fitness stuff that falls in the helping people get energy bucket, but then like pretty much any technology product is helping people save time. You got project management tools like Trello and Asana. You have big things like Uber, which helps you save time getting a car and moving across town.
Yeah.
You have Airbnb, which helps you save time finding a place
Yeah.
to live and work. And then you could have like a third bucket there that is, so you've got save time, gain energy, and then the other one, which is similar and kind of related to energy, but we have other things for it in modern life, is conserve resources. So ultimately, you need to save energy to survive, but we can view like money, for example, as like a form of energy kind of. And the more that you can conserve that, the more that you win. And so this is where we get things like Amazon. Boom, everything is cheaper. So they drive a lot of demand because of that. So basically what I'm getting at here, the kind of higher principle is to ask yourself, what is the deep fundamental desire that people have, those kind of unchanging desires that don't really change? Saving time, saving money, conserving energy, preserving safety. On that other side, on the defend side, we could put things like insurance, for example, that like helps people remain safe and provides a margin of safety. So you've got all these business models that as time goes on, business changes, but it's like a new iteration of serving the same fundamental desire. And so I think that's something that we can learn from kind of basic psychology. And even this is really even talking about like biological drives and things like that.
Oh God, it's amazing.
Business world.
It's amazing how much you understand and how you bring it all back to these like fundamental pain points and desires, and how that's so important to understand as you're building a business and knowing who you're serving and how to serve them. So now let's dive into this incredible book, which everyone cannot get enough of. What inspired you? I mean, I feel like I already have a sense of what inspired you because you told us sort of like how you even came into this whole topic yourself, but specifically what made you be like, I have to write this in a book. This has to go out in the world. Was it because you saw how your life changed so much from all of this? Was it because you just kept being asked these questions? What made you say like, I have to write this? This is a book.
Well, sort of to your last question there, like I have seen the power that habits have and can provide in shaping your life. And I think we could probably summarize it by saying like most of your results in life, we all so badly want our results to change. We want to, double our income or lose weight or reduce stress or get six-pack abs, like all this stuff. And so we think that the result is the thing that needs to change. But the truth is, a lot of the time, your results are a lagging measure of your habits. So like your bank account is a lagging measure of your financial habits, or your physical fitness is a lagging measure of your training and eating habits, or your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning and reading habits. Even something like the clutter on your desk at work or in your bedroom is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. And so I think that higher principle that the results you have in life are often a lagging measure of your habits kind of illustrates why I thought the topic was so important. It has such a broad universal applicability to almost any major area.
So good. That's so good. I just have to like take out a pen and underline like the results of your life are a measure like that has directly related to your habits. So I think, certainly there are other aspects that influence it, right? Like luck and randomness, misfortune, uncertainty. Sure. All those things play a role in life, but by definition, they are not under your control and your habits are. And so it's the only element of the equation that you can meaningfully influence. So for that reason, I thought it was very important to write about habits, but I started by writing on my site. I wrote on jamesclear.com. I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday for the first 3 years. So that was kind of my writing habit that like, in that sense, like the topic kind of wrote itself. Like I learned to build a habit as I was doing that and I was writing about it and so on. So I could have just kept doing that. The topic is equally important, but after 2 or 3 years, I started to have a fairly sizable audience, a few 100,000 email subscribers. Agents were coming to me about a book. Publishers were reaching out. So I started to be something I thought about more because people were talking to me about it a lot. That's really, really impressive. Like we have lots of people on the show and there's only a handful of people like Seth Godin, who's been here, who's had that kind of immediate like connection with his audience, that his blog grew so exponentially. What do you think it was about it wasn't only the fact that you were consistent. There was something about how you connected and what you wrote. What do you think it was that made your audience just keep coming back?
Yeah, that's a good question. It probably wasn't as immediate as it appeared from the outside, in the sense that, I had this, as I mentioned, I had this, career as an athlete and this background of like building habits and kind of thinking about those topics a lot. So I had a lot of like, maybe a decade of like personal experience to rely on. Then I mentioned that I had those first 2 years where I was an entrepreneur. I wasn't working on jamesclear.com yet. I was working on other projects that aren't even around anymore. But I was sort of cutting my teeth through that. And so there were a lot of one-time costs that I had to pay then that I didn't have to pay when I started my site. Like I knew how to set up an email list and where to put the forms and how to, like, I had a better idea of my voice as a writer and all that kind of stuff. So all of that up,
it like built on itself is what you're saying. There was a lot
of, well, it just made it much easier for me to kind of spring out of the gate when I did start writing about habits, because I had a better handle on all that, that kind of foundational stuff.
Yeah.
But I will say consistency made a big difference. And I think this is true in almost any area. Being reliable counts for so much. And so, the reality is I spend somewhere between 10 to 20 hours usually on any individual post. And I was writing 2 a week.
Wow.
And so I tried my best every time. And there just actually aren't really that many people who write 2 articles a week for 3 years. Like just by doing that,
that's true.
You kind of, are immediately jump into like whatever percent we want to say, the top 10% or something. By being reliable.
The book is getting go ahead.
I think there was another element, which is, and this is an interesting question to ask yourself if you're listening to this, which is like, what do you do in your free time? So I had other stuff I was working on before I launched the site, but I was so interested in habits that I just started keeping notes on it. And I had like a Word doc that was about 60 pages long that was like just James's thoughts on habits.
Wow.
And so because I was already interested in it, because it had kind of some natural inclination for me, I feel like readers can tell. People have very good BS meters. And so I think that authentic interest in the subject, I think comes through a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I think for all of a variety of reasons, but those are some of them, I think all of that kind of helped it, burst out of the gate.
That's amazing. As you're going through and your book is so good and everyone's loving it, as you're going through the book, there's a lot of things I want to touch on, but one thing is you talk about, and sort of like the middle section of the book is how your habits shape your identity and vice versa. And I know that's something that's really important to you. Let's talk about identity and what does that even mean? And let's unpack that. How do your habits shape your identity?
So, just a minute or two ago, I talked about how like we all want our results to change. We all want better outcomes. And you can sort of think of behavior change kind of like the layers of an onion, so let's say the outermost layer is the outcome that you want. So let's say it's something like, lose 30 pounds in the next 6 months. Then the next layer in is like the process that you follow. So it might be like, all right, if I want to lose 30 pounds, I need to come up with a plan. So I'm going to go to the gym for 3 days a week and I'm going to start this new diet or whatever. And usually the conversation kind of stops there. We set a goal, we have some kind of outcome that we want, and then we come up with a plan for achieving it. And we just sort of implicitly think, well, whoever I become at that point, once I lose 30 pounds, then I'll be the person I want to be. And my argument is there's like a little bit layer deeper in the onion. There's like the core, which we could call like your identity. So you've got your outcomes, you have your process, and then you have your identity. And the argument that I make is this concept I call identity-based habits, which is what I just described as an outcome-based habit. We start with the outcome, I want to lose 30 pounds, come up with a process, and then we assume I'll just be the person I want to be. Instead, I think we should invert that. Let's start by asking ourselves, who is the type of person that could achieve the results that I want? So for example, who is the type of person that could lose 30 pounds? Well, maybe it's the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And so now actually what I'm focused on is building that identity of being the person who doesn't miss workouts. And my process follows that. And then instead of letting the identity follow naturally, we let the outcome follow naturally. It's like, look, whenever the results come, they come, but I'm going to focus on being this kind of person and having a habit that reinforces that. And this ultimately, I think, is maybe the most powerful thing that habits can provide, which is that yes, habits can help you lose weight or make more money or reduce stress or do all these other things, write a book, whatever. But what they really do is they reinforce your desired identity. And what I mean by that is like true behavior change is really identity change. You know, like the goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to like do a silent meditation retreat. The goal is to become a meditator. And once you start to assign that identity to yourself, I'm a meditator, I'm a runner, I'm a writer, you're not even really motivating yourself to do the habit anymore. You're just kind of, you're not even really pursuing behavior change. You're just acting in alignment with the type of person you see yourself to be.
Love that.
And this, I think, is the power that particularly small habits can provide, which is, I think this is the best summary of what an identity-based habit is and how it works, which is every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you want to become.
Oof.
So
wow.
When you do one push-up, no, that does not transform your body, but it does cast a vote for I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And when you write one sentence, no, that doesn't finish the novel, but it does cast a vote for I'm a writer. And the first time you do that, you may not believe this new identity or this new aspect of your identity fully. But the more that you cast votes, you know, it's kind of like any election. You don't need a unanimous vote to win. You just need the majority. And the more that you build up those votes, the more you build up this body of evidence and you have something new to like root that identity in. And so that I think is the real power or benefit that habits provide, which is that they allow you to accumulate evidence of being a new kind of person, of solidifying a new identity, and they give you a path to develop confidence, overcome self-doubt, and start to look at yourself in a new way.
Oh my God, James, that is so brilliant. I mean, everyone needs to hear those words. So there's so many juicy things in this book. I'm going to just keep touching on all these different pieces because you're here and it's such a gift to have you here.
Sure.
So we're kind of going to hop around. One thing that you talk about, which is so important, and I know that people are going to be like, yes, get to this part, is how to fix the causes of the bad habits. Because it's so easy to be like, oh, these are all the cool things I want to do. But then there's all this stuff, right? So how do we understand why we're stuck in the bad stuff and the stuff that's not serving us? And how do we fix it?
Yeah, good question. So from a high level, you've got about 4 different ways that you could break a bad habit, and some of them are more effective than others. So roughly speaking, what you'd like is you would like the cues that prompt your bad habit, the things that make you think about it or trigger it. You want those things to become invisible. So that's the first thing, is make it invisible. The second thing is you want the habit to be less attractive. I'll give you an example of doing that in a second. But the less attractive it is, the less motivated you're going to feel to do it. The third thing is you want it to be difficult. So if you, if you increase friction or add the number of steps, you make it less convenient. Well, now there's less likelihood you'll fall into it. So make it difficult is the third one. And the fourth thing that you could do is make it unsatisfying. So you like add a consequence to the behavior or have some kind of immediate cost to it. And so those 4, make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, make it unsatisfying. That's kind of the big picture view of how you could break a bad habit. Before I give an example of those, let me just flag this as we're talking about it. So we've got those 4 for breaking bad habit. If you want to build a good habit, you just invert it. So rather than making the cue invisible, you want to make it obvious. Rather than making it unattractive, you make it attractive. Rather than making it difficult, make it as easy as possible, convenient, frictionless, simple. And then rather than making it unsatisfying, make it satisfying, add some kind of reward to it.
Yeah.
But let me give you 1 or 2 examples for the bad habit. So probably the best places to intervene are the first and the third one. So making it invisible. So this is about reducing cues. So for example, if you spend more money than you would like shopping online, well, don't subscribe to emails from J.Crew or Nordstrom or wherever, like unsubscribe from all the cues. If you're spending too much money on electronics, don't read the latest tech review blogs. If you feel like you're trying to be on a diet or you're overeating, then don't subscribe to a bunch of food bloggers on Instagram, So by reducing those cues, you reduce the likelihood that you're going to be sparked or think about it or be triggered. Sometimes it is surprising that, because those sound like very small actions, sometimes it's surprising how meaningful of an effect just removing the cue can have. So for example, one of the habits that I try to follow, I don't do it all the time, but maybe let's say 90% of the time, I leave my phone in another room while I'm working in the morning. And so I don't bring it in until lunch. So I get a block of 3 or 4 hours in the morning where it's not in the room. And I have a home office. So if I don't have the phone in the room, that means it's just like down the stairs or like literally outside the hallway in another space. It's only like 30 seconds away, but I never go get it. And what's interesting to me is if I have it next to me, if it's on the desk, I'm like everybody else. I check it like every 3 minutes, right? And so the question I have is, well, did I really want it or not? You know, like in one sense, I wanted it bad enough to check it every 3 minutes if it was next to me. But in another sense, I never wanted it bad enough to get up and walk 30 seconds to go get it. And that I think is the power of like making that cue invisible, or that's also an example of increasing friction and adding steps between the behavior. So those, sometimes that can be surprising how well that works.
Wow.
When that doesn't work, let me give you one more example. Let's say that tomorrow you go to bed tonight and you're like, all right, tomorrow's going to be the day. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to go for a run at 6 a.m. So you set your alarm and then 6 a.m. rolls around and your bed is warm. It's cold outside. You're like, I'll just press snooze instead. So your bad habit here is that you're sleeping in, or you're procrastinating, or you're lazy, or however you want to term it. And so instead, you could rewind the clock, come back to today. You text a friend and you say, hey, can we meet at the park at 6:30? Well, now 6 a.m. rolls around and your bed is still warm and it's still cold outside. But if you don't get up and go for a run, you're a jerk because you leave your friend at the park all alone. And so that's an example of, and I have a bunch of these examples in the book. It's an example of what's called a commitment device. And it's a choice you make in the present that locks you in or commits you to a behavior in the future. And texting your friend is that commitment device in this example. And immediately what happened there is that you used the other two ones that I mentioned. You made it unattractive. So suddenly the calculus in your brain is like, oh, it's much less attractive to sleep in than it was before. And then you also made it unsatisfying if you don't follow through because there's a cost. If you sleep in, then all of a sudden, it's actually, I did get to sleep in, but I'm actually like kind of guilty and sorry for it because I look like a bad friend. So a commitment device is an example of using the other 2 points of intervention. But
so good.
Those are just some like high level examples, but kind of broadly speaking, you want those same 4 things: make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, make it unsatisfying.
Yep. So good. And thank God you wrote a book on this, because there's so much to understand about really how to do all of that and apply it. And so you guys, when you read the book, you'll get so much more out of each piece of what he's saying. I know that it's something that you shared with me that you wanted to touch on. And in the book, you talk about this, the role that your family and friends have in shaping your habits. And I was actually surprised when we talked before and I said, what's really important here? And you were like, I really want to make sure that we touch on that, because as I read through it, I was like, oh, okay, that's part of the book, like everything else, but it stood out to you. Why does it stand out to you so much? And what do we have to understand about the role that our family and friends, our social life has on our habits?
Well, so as you mentioned, I did write one chapter on this in the book. So I knew it was important in that sense, like I wrote a chapter on it, but this is one of the topics that since the book has come out, I think is even more important than I realized. The social environment, whether we want to call it social norms or the tribes that we are a part of, the groups that we belong to, the people you surround yourself with, it's almost like a fish in water in the sense that it's like, what is water? You know, you're just surrounded by it so much that you don't even realize how much it meaningfully impacts the choices and habits you make each day. So for example, sometimes I'll do like a keynote speech at a company or something. Well, I'll walk in and I'll wear like a suit or a jacket or something nice. There's no reason that I have to wear that. Like technically speaking, I could wear a bathing suit or something, but that would be weird, right? That would violate the social norm.
Right.
And that happens for all of us. We choose what to wear based on the norms of that place. There's no physical reason why you couldn't work out in a dress at the gym, but you don't do it because it would be ridiculous to violate the norm that way. And so what we wear, you move into a new neighborhood, for example, and you walk outside on Tuesday night and you see that all your neighbors have their recycling bins out. And you're like, oh, I guess we need to sign up for recycling. That's what people like us do here. Or you have another habit of mowing your lawn and trimming your hedges. why do we mow our lawns? Well, partially it feels good to have a clean, orderly lawn, but mostly it feels good to have a clean lawn because you don't want to be the neighbor who's judged by everybody else, right? And so it's actually the social expectation that drives that habit, and you mow your lawn for the next 25 years that you live there, right? And this, I think, is the main takeaway that I'm trying to get across with the importance of social norms, which is all of the other strategies I talk about in the book can be very effective for getting habits to start. And some of the things that we mentioned earlier, like environment design and cues and whatnot, those are really effective ways to start habits. But if you want habits to stick for the long run, the community or the tribe that you are in is one of the most powerful ways to get it to stick. So one way we could think about this is that we are all members of multiple tribes. Some of them are large, like what it means to be American or what it means to be French or something, or some of them are small, like what it means to be a neighbor on your street or a member of your local CrossFit gym or a volunteer at some organization. But all of those groups, large and small, they have a set of shared habits, a set of norms that people practice when they're in that group. And when the habits are, what the punchline of this is that you want to join groups where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. Because if it's normal in that group, then it's going to be very easy and attractive for you to stick to it because it helps you fit in.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if you have to choose, if most people have to choose between having the habits they want to have, but being ostracized from the group or being cast out, or having habits that they don't really feel that great about, but they get to fit in and belong, most people would rather be wrong and with the crowd than right and by themselves. Most people would rather belong than to be on their own, to be lonely. So in many cases, the desire to belong overpowers the desire to improve. And I think that is particularly true in the long run of things. You might be able to run against the grain of your friends or your family expectations for a week or maybe even a month. But man, over the long term, it just really adds a lot of friction to those relationships, and it's hard to do that. So it becomes crucial to come back to that key takeaway, to join a group where your desired behavior is the normal behavior.
Yeah. When Jillian Michaels was here, she was talking about a person who was on The Biggest Loser, which was the show that she started, and she was coaching. And she said there was a boy, like a younger gentleman, who had a big breakthrough and lost a tremendous amount of weight. And he went home during the taping. They let them go home for Christmas. And he came back, and in 10 days, he put on so much weight. Yeah. And she just stood with him and she cried with him. And she said, "What happened?" And he said, "When I got home, I opened the door, and my mother, who's really obese, she looked like the scaredest I've ever seen her, because I think she felt she was losing me because I was sort of ascending past all of this and I was shedding the weight and she wasn't." And he said, and I wanted to be loyal to her. And I think that that's what it was. It gives me the chills actually to talk about it, because she really got right to the heart of something. This loyalty that you'll feel, you won't even notice you're feeling it, but I've seen that happen with friends. I mean, in fact, the number one regret of the dying is people saying things like, "Oh, I just wanted the approval of my parents," or "I didn't do that job," or "I didn't try that thing because I didn't want to offend my partner," or so-and-so. And what you're saying is so huge. And I don't think people necessarily understand how we are accommodating all the time or acquiescing because of social pressure.
I mean, we've all felt that, right? Like, it feels good to be praised, respected, approved of, loved, supported. And so we all want those feelings. And so we practice habits and behaviors largely as a signal to other people so we can get praise, approval, love, support, belonging. And now the good news is wildly different behaviors get praised and supported and loved in different environments. And so you can seek out or create, in some cases, an environment where that behavior is normal and upheld. And so, I mean, you can apply this literally to any behavior. If you hang out with a bunch of jazz musicians, then suddenly practicing an instrument 6 nights a week sounds very normal because that's what everybody else is doing, right?
Yeah.
So it's really just about finding that pocket of people. And even if you can't be around them constantly, that's fine. But like, give yourself maybe an hour, a sacred space where you can go and meet with a group where you can like rise together and support each other's goals and get praised for the good habit that you want to have.
Yeah. And this really makes a great case for being a part of a coaching program or a mastermind. I've heard so many people say, I did so-and-so's mastermind. What'd you get out of it? Oh my gosh, the community. Like just being in that community, forget all the business advice and strategy. It was like just being in around those people, I really leveled up. Moving through, there's so many, such important parts of the book. But one thing that I wanted to talk about is, because so many people write in about this, and you know it, you even referred to it earlier, but people procrastinate, people, in fact, I mean, all the time, you ask people like why they're not getting something done. They're like, I have too much to do. But then we know through research that the number one thing people are doing are the things that are not really so important. Like you don't need to check your email so much. You need to actually do that one other important thing. And that's the thing you keep putting off. And you talk about how you have a 2-minute rule to overcome procrastination. Tell us about that.
So, well, first, that little phenomenon that you just mentioned, I feel like I do that all the time. Sometimes I refer to it as productive procrastination. This is like maybe one of my vices that actually serves me a little well, which is like, all right, I know I should be writing this book, but at least I'm not like distracting myself with like YouTube clips. I'm like doing other work that I'm doing, like items 3 through 5 on the priority list and just avoiding items 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So at least I'm getting something done.
Yep.
But, yeah. So the 2-minute rule, this certainly can apply to procrastination. I think more broadly, it can apply just to the process of building any habit and what it's like to start that. If we want to like reframe procrastination or look at it from a different angle, what we could say is that the process of not procrastinating, the process of overcoming that and beating it, is really just the process of getting started each day. If you get started on the task, then by definition, you are not procrastinating on it. And so this technique, the 2-minute rule, is all about making sure it's easy to get started.
I love that. Wow.
So the 2-minute rule says, take whatever habit you're trying to build, whatever ambition that you have, and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So for example, read 40 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And sometimes I like tell people that and they think, okay, I know what you're saying, but like, I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out. Like I know I actually want to do the workout. So if this is some kind of mental trick, like why would I fall for it basically? And I understand if you feel that way, but I think there's actually a deeper point embedded here. So I have this story, this reader of mine whose name is Mitch, I mentioned him in the book, and he ended up losing over 100 pounds. And when he went to the gym for the first time, for the first 6 weeks, he had this rule for himself where he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he got in the car, drove to the gym, got out, did half an exercise, got back in the car, drove home. And it sounds ridiculous, right? It seems silly. It's like, okay, clearly this is not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you step back just a little bit, what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up. He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And this, I think, is a much deeper truth about habits that often gets overlooked, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved. It has to become the standard in your life before you can scale it up or optimize. And for whatever reason, so often we're focused on finding the perfect workout plan, the best business idea, the ideal diet program. We're so focused on optimizing that we don't give ourselves permission to show up, even if it's just in a small way. And so the 2-minute rule kind of gets over that, whether we want to call it a research spiral or a procrastination tendency, or kind of our inclination to like optimize and theorize about the best way to have a plan for change. And it gets over that and gets you more toward the action side of things. And it allows you to implement it and start to master the art of showing up so that you have some raw material to work with and optimize and expand on.
So good. Okay, last piece on the book, and then we're going to finish with 2 other questions. When you talk about the Goldilocks rule, I think it's so important because that comes up all the time for our audience. Like, how do I stay motivated? How do I stay in it? What's your advice for that? Like, how do you stay in it?
So, this is something anybody experiences when they build a habit, which is the more that you do it, the more routine it becomes and the more expected it becomes. And so you start to lose elements of surprise. You start to know what the whole process is going to be like. And you do become more fluent at it, but you also, for many people, you start to get a little bored because you know exactly what this is going to be like. And when boredom starts to rise, motivation tends to fall. You're like, oh, I know exactly what to expect. Why am I doing this? Like, this isn't really fun anymore, interesting.
Yeah.
And so the Goldilocks rule is a way to try to maximize your motivation or maintain it for the long run. And so what the Goldilocks rule says is that humans experience peak levels of motivation when they work on tasks of just manageable difficulty. Not too hard, not too easy, just right. And a good example of this is like, imagine that you're playing tennis. And so if you play against a professional like Serena Williams or Roger Federer, well, it might be cool for a minute, but like it's going to get boring pretty quick because you're going to lose every point. Meanwhile, if you play against like a 3-year-old, it might be cute for a second, but if you're trying to play a serious match, it's going to get boring again because you're going to win every point. And instead, if you play against someone who's kind of your peer, your equal, they win a few points, you win a few points, you have a chance to win the match, but only if you really try. That is where we have peak levels of motivation. It's like success is within sight, but it requires effort. And so the Goldilocks rule is all about trying to maintain that. And when it comes to habits, this means that you should, what I call habit graduation, you should graduate to the next level occasionally. So, I just mentioned the 2-minute rule. Well, maybe if you're trying to get in shape and build a running habit, the 2-minute rule is I put on my running shoes, I walk out the door, and I lock the door. And that's all that I have to do. If I go for a run at all, it's just a bonus. But after a week of that, you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting bored of just putting on my shoes and walking out the door. So it's like, well, maybe now the habit is I put on my shoes, I lock the door, and I go around the block. And I only have to go around one block, but that's a little bit of a graduation. And then gradually you can see how this goes. You continue to expand so that you're staying on the edge of your ability. You're staying in that Goldilocks zone where it's just hard enough that it requires some motivation and challenge and interest, but still easy enough that you're like, yeah, 98% of the time I can do this without fail. And so that's really what the Goldilocks rule is about, is like keeping you in that motivated zone.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. That's so good. You wrote a post that I think really is a nice tie-in to the work we do on the show, the proven path to doing unique and meaningful work. What does that path look like to you?
So there's this story that this Finnish photographer tells. He grew up in Helsinki, and he's like, in the center of Helsinki, there's a bus station. And if you get on one of the buses there, you start to leave downtown and you come to the first stop, and you can sort of imagine each bus line like your career or like the path that you're following through life. And you start to do work for a little while, and you get to that first stop, and people say, oh, we've already had a bus here before. Like we've seen this kind of work. And you get to the second stop, and people say the same thing. Oh, we've already seen this before. You get to the third stop, and they're like, oh yeah, your work kind of reminds me of X or Y or Z. And the longer you go, you keep encountering these roadblocks where people are like, yeah, you're just imitating this person, or we've already seen this, or, this is like that other product. But as you keep going, the bus lines start to diverge. They go to different areas of town. And if you stay on the bus long enough, then you get to a stop where nobody's come before. And when you arrive, people say, oh, it's so great you're here. We haven't had a bus provide this before. We haven't seen this kind of work. We haven't seen this style. We haven't had this problem solved in this way yet. And his argument is, the really great thing is that not only have you like found your kind of unique selling proposition then, or your like, your particular strategy or angle or the space that you should occupy, but you also regain the entire line because they get interested in like what you did before to get to this unique place. They're like, oh, wow, that was your history. That was how you got here. Suddenly all of that work is now valuable too. Tell me more about that. And so this idea of just staying on the bus, I think is a really great path to doing unique and proven and valuable work. Pretty much everybody starts by imitating or iterating. We take the inputs that we have in our lives and we look at a way to apply that, or some new way that, that sparks an idea or whatever. But if you continue to iterate, you continue to build on all the stuff that you imitate, then suddenly it becomes something unique. It becomes something interesting. And so I think the proven path to meaningful work is, one, consistency and reliability, sticking with it. And two, using a lot of inputs and sources so that you can start to pull bits and pieces from like 1,000 different directions and turn them into your own unique collage or mosaic. But it's really that reliability is a crucial element in that process.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of the bus. So good. So good. When people finish this podcast episode today, what are a couple powerful, clear action steps maybe they could start with?
It's a good question. So I think first we can just summarize a little bit of what we already talked about, so take away, if you can have one of these ideas or what, like, it's like a seed that you can plant in your mind and then just let it grow into something more. So the idea, for example, that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want.
I love that.
Great. Walk around all day. Think about that. Like look for an example, look for a way, an opportunity to cast a vote for being the kind of person you want to be. The idea that you want to make your bad habits invisible or more difficult, that you want to make them unattractive, fine. Carry those seeds around and like think about how you can plant those throughout your physical environment or the places that you work in. The idea that you want to join a tribe or join a group where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. Great. Like start looking around. Where are spaces where people who have the habits you want to have, where do those people hang out? Can you find them somewhere? And then also the 2-minute rule, this idea of like, let me scale it down, and a habit has to be a habit has to be established before it can be improved. That's another little seed you can plant. Okay. How can I establish this habit? Even if it's a little less than what I wanted right now, how can I build something that could grow or expand? So I think all of those are things that you can walk around and carry with you.
Yeah.
The last one though, and I want to add a new one that I think you can also, another little seed that you can kind of hold in your mind, is we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So you have all kinds of goals that you want to achieve in life, results that you'd like to have, and so on. But as we mentioned early on, your results are a lagging measure of your habits. And so think about not how do I set bigger goals, but how do I build a system that reinforces those goals? And I would define the system as the collection of habits that you follow each day. So your goal, that's the outcome you want. Your system is the collection of habits that you have. And that idea that no matter how ambitious your vision is, you're always going to default come back to whatever that daily system is that you're following, whatever that collection of habits is that you have. That I think is another key principle to keep in mind.
So cool. One of the things that comes up a lot on this show is that different guests that we have will talk about various morning routines that they have and how important they are and how they want to like charge their batteries, so to speak, and make sure they're feeding their mind with positivity and reading good things or listening to a show or taking a run. Do you have a morning practice that you stick to?
Yeah. So my morning routine is very simple. I wake up, take a shower, get a glass of water, and then I start writing on, whatever project whatever thing I'm working on, whatever topic I'm working on right then. But your point that morning routines are valuable is true. It's valuable to do those things at any time of the day, whether it's a workout or a meditation or, whatever the practice is. But the reason that morning routines can be so helpful is that we all have the same 24 hours in a day, but we have differing amounts of control over each hour. So for example, generally speaking, you have more control over the hour from say 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. than you do over the hour from say 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. when you're in the middle of the workday and you have to respond to other people's agenda and you have the expectations of bosses and so on. So morning routines are really valuable because they tend to be higher control periods. And so it's a good time to build those habits because you're less likely to be interrupted by other people. You're more likely to respond to your own agenda rather than somebody else's. The
reason I asked you that and as we're winding up is because I feel like everything you're talking about in taking action and desired action and working toward what we really want, it seems to me that people take action when they believe that it's fruitful to do so. And I think a lot of people walk around with a lot of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and there might be a part of people listening right now saying, that all sounds amazing, but I don't believe enough in myself, or I don't believe enough in like, if I did any of these habits and read Tim Ferriss's book that it would result in anything anyway. Maybe because I don't think I'm good enough. Maybe because I don't actually believe in the system. Maybe I actually don't think that, I just have a lot of, maybe one of my habits is negative thinking. And so I asked you that because I wonder how we start with that and how we handle that so that we can even do any of these things, so that we believe that any of it will actually matter.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is like it can be a powerful force. So believing that you deserve something or that you're capable of something, trying to manifest that, or whatever term you want to use, believing that you're capable of whatever you want to achieve, just believing something does not make it true. However, believing that you are not capable of something will prevent you from trying. And so confidence creates an opportunity, but self-doubt sets your floor. Self-doubt sets your ceiling. It determines how high you can go, because if anything beyond that level of self-doubt, you're not willing to attempt.
Right.
So you have to at least believe a change is possible in order to try. And this is a phrase actually I had written down, but I think I ended up cutting it from the manuscript of the book. But as I was working on it, one of the things I was going to ask the reader in the introduction is, look, I'm not asking you to believe that this change is going to happen. I'm not going to asking you to guarantee that it's going to happen, but I am asking you to believe that it's possible. I am asking you to at least be open to the possibility of change. And so I think we need to have at least that starting point. Otherwise, you won't attempt it. Now, what you're mentioning here about like negative thinking being a bad habit or something like that, I think we can kind of broadly put habits into two buckets. You've got habits of action, like doing a push-up or meditating for 1 minute or writing one sentence. And then you have habits of thought, which are things like negative thinking and so on. And man, habits of thought are really challenging to change because they're so instantaneous. They arise like almost immediately when a situation occurs. And so this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about shifting your identity or changing your identity. Another way to say that is you need to change the internal narrative or the internal story that you tell yourself, which the story you tell yourself is just the thoughts that you keep repeating. And as far as I know, there are only two ways to do that effectively. The first way is to have an epiphany of some sort. And this could happen through a conversation or a book that you read. But epiphanies are very rare. And the more reliable way that I know to change that internal narrative is that you have to have signals of progress. You have to have proof that things are actually moving in the right direction. And at first, that first signal of progress, or maybe even the 5th or the 10th, it's just like, maybe I got lucky. Maybe things are moving that direction, whatever, but I still don't believe it firmly. But after like the 1,000th signal, as to use that casting votes metaphor again, after the 1,000th vote gets casted, then all of a sudden it's like, wow, we actually have like a lot of body of evidence here, and it's kind of hard to deny. I had this high school basketball coach, who used to say, confidence is just displayed ability. So like, if you want to be confident in your ability to make a free throw, go out and practice. And once you make 10 in a row, you'll feel a lot more confident about it. And so you have to display your ability to do something, even if it's in a very small way. And this, I think, is, again, one of the core things that makes Atomic Habits and this idea of building small habits so useful. It can be really tiny, but you're casting a vote. You're providing a signal of progress. You're providing some proof that things are actually different. You are actually capable of that.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is the only effective way that I know to do it, aside from having an epiphany. Yeah. But it's a very long process. You have to be willing to commit to it and kind of have this long arc of building up evidence over time.
Yeah. Is that something that you've done where you write down the evidence for the narrative that you're hoping to hold on to?
Yeah. So writing it down, we can think about that in a bunch of different ways, but basically what we're talking about is, are you measuring it? And so, like my dad, for example, he likes to swim. Well, when he gets out of the pool after any given workout, his body looks the same. Like there's no physical change, right? It's insignificant, the difference that any workout makes visibly. But he pulls out a little pocket calendar and he puts a little X on that day. And at the end of the month, he counts up all the X's that he has. And each of those are a little signal of progress. It's a little bit of evidence. It's like, in your words, writing it down. It's a way to see that I am actually making the changes I want to make.
Yeah.
So even on like that, say the third week in the pool or something, your body's kind of sore. You look the same in the mirror. The scale hasn't really changed. It's easy to give up at that point and feel like it's not worth it. But if you can pull out that little calendar and look at it, then it's like, oh, actually, this is the 16th day out of 22 that I've worked out. Like I have a lot of progress here. I have a lot of signals that I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so writing it down is a good way to provide a visual evidence that you're being the kind of person you want to be, or you're reinforcing that desired identity. I think being able to see your progress, that is a really crucial element to believing in being a new kind of person or eradicating self-doubt. And so,
yeah. Well, Angela Duckworth, she was telling me that grit and perseverance is correlated with optimism, and that is something that we actually we can increase our capacity for optimism. And I think a lot of what you're doing is helping people in their work towards all of these beautiful pursuits. So thank you so much for what you're doing. Will you tell us, please, where we can buy your book, where we can find you and stay connected?
Yeah, thank you. So if you want to learn more about the book, you can just go to atomichabits.com and you can find everything there. And then if you'd like to check out some of my other work, it's all just at jamesclear.com. If you click on articles, they're organized by category, so you can kind of dive in and see what's interesting to you. And then probably the other main popular thing on the website is the newsletter. And there's a link in the navigation of that as well. So that goes out weekly. And feel free to dig in and see if you like it.
Well, I can't wait to see what's next for you because you're so young to have done so much. So given the fact that you have so many good habits, I'm truly like, wow, what else is he going to do and create? So thank you for being so generous with your work. And thank you for being so generous in all of the ways that you answered all these questions.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the opportunity. And it's good to talk to you.
Yeah, so good.